I'm Doug Bellenger. I'm from Movitas. Has anybody ever heard of Movitas around here and know what we do? Okay, we got a few. We've been around. We've been a company in Philadelphia for about 5 to 6 years that nobody actually knows exists because primarily our work is in the Caribbean and all kinds of other places. So the only fun thing we've really done in Philadelphia is probably the Cleopatra exhibit. So we focus on mobile. We've done text messaging and YouTube and all kinds of crazy stuff and content management and user management. Cleopatra was an exhibit where you got to go in, you used to scan things and touch things and see things. So our model's kind of all over the place when it comes to this stuff, but I'm going to today explain kind of a case study around hotel customers that we have and how we use mobile applications and things like PhoneGap, HTML5, CSS, and different devices and how they support it. So I'm going to skip this real quick just because this is the old school way of doing slides according to this. So Movitas is about a 15 to 20 person company out in Bryn Mawr. We started doing mobile content management systems and user management 5-6 years ago. We've slowly kind of grown our team and we've really kind of moved ourselves into hospitality solutions for mobile. So everybody's familiar with going to an all-inclusive resort. Everybody likes to go to the Caribbean. You don't like to go to the Caribbean? Okay. Some people like to hike, like myself. Other people like the beach. So Movitas, what we do is we focus on a set of applications and information for people who are traveling to all-inclusive resorts. So this is where I would queue up the awesome video, but we're going to skip that. It's got a dancing lady. She says, hey, when you're at the resort, you can get calendar information. You can get deals such as free spa treatments. You can call your friends. So we kind of break our stuff up into 4 things, and those in the back probably can't see it, but this is kind of an example app. Now Resort is a resort that we're working with down in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. We have resorts in Cancun. We have resorts in Florida, kinds of all different places. So, and our system is heavy on the web application side. So we've got destination information such as maps, emergency information, culture. We've got listings such as restaurants and reviews. The things we take for granted in the US are like Yelp and Lonely Planet and all these other places. When you go to Puerto Vallarta, you've probably A, never heard of it to begin with, and it's beautiful. But B, you probably have no idea what clubs to go to, where to get a massage, where to eat, what to do. So we have a big destination engine there. So it was important for us when I get to the requirements to not have to put all of this stuff on every device. And I went through the caching presentation today, and she was dead on that you need to figure out what to cache. But we're still working through some of those things. So second thing that we do a lot of is hotel information. When you get to the hotel, what are the restaurant menus? When does the big Mexican fiesta happen? And they do the dancing thing, and Kevin's been there. So we do all that stuff. We integrate with our property management system so that if you want to get pillows sent to your room, you can do that. So all of this stuff is integrated via SOAP or REST and all kinds of different things that our content management system's been built on. So another reason that we didn't want to have to put everything for every client on every single device, which we'll get to the requirements. So then the third thing we do is a lot of social interaction. So we do kind of everything that every social site does. You get to that restaurant that you just found out about or that nightclub Mandala down the street and you want to check in and tell your friends back at the hotel, or you want to review a restaurant, or you want to post something at the hotel like, hey, I need people to play volleyball with me later. So a big social element to it. You can find friends, you can find staff members, you can do all these other things. For a few years, we did all this stuff without actually never needing an app. So everything was done with content management system because there was nothing outside of maybe the camera that we really needed to tap into, because we could get GPS information via HTML5. We could get all of our content delivered via HTML and HTML5. So then we got into this last piece, which is kind of the thing we've been running around the world selling now, and the fun part of how we do this, which is communication. So we took this application and we worked with these hotels, and one of the biggest things that ends up happening is that you go to this all-inclusive resort, your phone gets put in airplane mode. You can't connect with your family, you can't connect with your friends, you can't receive text messages. If you do, it costs hundreds of dollars. But what we wanted to do was enable you while you're at this awesome resort to be able to call each other on property. So why would you sit at a pool and then have to walk back to your room to call your friend who's in another room who's also sitting at the pool when you could pick up your iPhone or Android and call them at the pool? Or if your mom or your family back home wants to call you, they should be able to pick up the app at home and call you no matter where you are on property, even if you're on the golf course. So we focus a lot on this communication element and the social element. So that's kind of the base, because once we got to that point, we had to break away from this web content and think about how we were going to make apps, because we needed to connect to the speaker and microphone, which you can't do with HTML5. So yeah, exactly what I was talking about, all that stuff. So extending, providing, creating. So I like to always kind of go back to the famous South Park episode with the underpants gnomes, and they really wanted to find out how they were going to make a profit off this. So the first thing they needed to do was collect underpants. So for us, it was requirements. So we really needed to find an integrated solution. We needed to find something that was going to extend our CMS. We understood that there was an advantage for us to build a full API and communication layer and put everything native. But we also had this great tool that we could skin every single resort. We could segment their customers. We could collect data on their customers, like if they like the spa or they like restaurants. So we didn't want to replace our current marketing and CMS system. We wanted to extend it. So we also needed to provide a consistent interface for native functionality. So if I was on the Android device and I have this look and feel for this Now app, and I was on the iPhone and I want to get my picture added to it so I can post my social stuff, we wanted to make sure that was easy for them to find with one button, which was driven by HTML. So we needed the application to be flexible. We have multiple clients and multiple destinations in multiple places. You can imagine if we're trying to put in restaurant information for a local area like Puerto Vallarta at one hotel, we wanted to make sure that we could put it up to the next 17 hotels without having to duplicate that information. So we're not a big team, but we're smart people to know that everybody wants the same exact information for their guests because they want to get them out of the hotels and spending money. So we wanted to make it scalable for all parties. We wanted to be able to deploy changes via web. So we wanted to use our content management system and say, hey, here's an updated restaurant. Here's the new pool schedule for aerobics or whatever's going to happen. And we wanted to be able to easily migrate updates for all of our clients. So if we ran into a situation where we had a bug or a new feature, we wanted to be able to say, okay, today we're going to start this, we're going to fix it, and then over the next week we're going to deploy 9 apps at the same exact time. So, and then that also falls into rapid deployment. We needed to be able to quickly implement these things. So I'm going to go into a little bit later how we used Git and how we set up all of our repositories so that we basically can make a change once and just start pulling away and everything and getting it where it needs to be. So those are our requirements. So we started looking at options. This was about 1.5 years ago. I consulted with some very bright minds in the Philadelphia area, my team and Chariot, and a couple others, that kind of floated in and out. And we looked at the 3 options. We could either build a native application for each device and client. Sounded like an awesome idea because we would have really fast apps and we'd have really awesome graphics for each one of them that made sense. But it would also cost us a fortune, and it was going to take us 2 to 3 years to get all of our content for each client out into the right place. We looked at building a hybrid application using a tool like PhoneGap or Accelerator, which you guys probably figured out is where we ended up. But we looked at that and we said, how is this going to get us to market faster than if we did it ourselves? And then the last option is we looked at building a hybrid internally, which my conclusions might point to as a potential option for us in the future. So we actually chose PhoneGap because it was something we could quickly deploy. It had a lot of support. People we were working with understood it. And we saw that there was new devices that were going to be added to it, like Windows Phone and BlackBerry, that we would be able to take advantage of. So how we made it work. So in the Movitas system, we've kind of put this into 3 layers. First, we have our content management system, which is basically serving all of our clients. So when you put a URL into our site, if it's Now or Secrets or Dreams or Marriott or whatever it is, we're going to serve up the content specific to that. So everybody in this room is familiar with how content management systems work. So what we did is we extrapolated from that and we started adding in custom HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and we communicated with JSON and all kinds of other web services within those sites. So we broke off our standard iPhone, look and feel, and we broke off our BlackBerry look and feel, and we said, okay, we've got this look and feel, and now we have an application look and feel, right? So now we have this special app. We're going to send special user agents. We're going to send special information to it, special JavaScript, and we're going to use that to communicate. So once we got to the device level, then we used PhoneGap in order to set up that interface between each device. So everybody's familiar with PhoneGap and what it's used for? I like the head shaking. Okay, cool. So we started with that, And then we did one of the things that PhoneGap is great for, which is we started building our own third-party plugins or brought in APIs we needed, like child browsers and stuff like that, to give people access to Facebook logins and stuff like that. So all of those things then sat on top of basically another layer that was native, which we needed in order to handle things like the calling functionality, the camera functionality, or anything that we're building from a plugin standpoint goes into that code. So honestly, it was really scalable. It made sense to us, and it's fit. And when I talked to Chariot and we were like, hey, what if we need to do this additional function, or if my internal team says, what are we going to do with this? It's pretty simple to add a plugin and then connect it back up. So highly recommend it if you're doing anything with that. So, and the end result ends up getting us something like this. So because we had this content management system, we end up with iPad versions, PC versions, BlackBerry, Android, iPhone, and they keep continuing to grow. And pending the device you're on, and whether you're on mobile web or application, you'll get a different set of functionality. So what do we have to consider when we started doing this? So it was one thing for us to say, hey, we're going to use PhoneGap to bridge this gap between these devices. But then we started looking at things that are common, right? That aren't common, for different devices, right? So when I placed a call on one application, I couldn't have an Android screen pop up on the iPhone. We needed to make sure that the animations on the native functionality mimicked what those users were doing. So this was a big consideration. When we got to the BlackBerry, it was the same thing. We had to try and figure out what the typical look and feel for the BlackBerry is. So even though the devices suck, they actually can answer the phone okay, so we needed to make sure people got that. We needed to make sure that we could display things like the numbers. We needed to make sure we could give them easy things like, for us, United States versus +1, this is a big function of our system. We don't want each user to have to go and figure out whether they're in Mexico, if they need a +001 or whatever it is. So we handle all that logic for them. So this was in consideration for device-specific interfaces. Another thing we had to design around was these unique device features. So you get the iPhone, and everybody starts there, and they got one button. Then you start looking at the Android and the BlackBerry, and they're actually easier to design for than the iPhone is because you're integrating the back buttons and the menu buttons. So you have a few more options that you didn't have. This is kind of a challenge for us because we use one common interface. So we actually have a back button we add for the iPhone. So the Android ends up with two, which I know some people would find to be annoying, but it's something that we could eliminate with CSS if we wanted to. But we also kind of, with the ice cream sandwich thing, it's not as prominent as it used to be with these 4 buttons. So things may change a little bit. So, but then we also had to look at, with the BlackBerry, how do we integrate the green and red buttons for call and end, and how does the user interact with those? So a lot of different things to consider as we were designing these interfaces. So when we started looking at app versus mobile, this is also a big thing that we have to factor in. Our clients get 2 different experiences on the same exact web page, just like we were talking about with the responsive design and some of the caching stuff too. Pending what they're on, they're going to get a different experience. So if I'm on the mobile application and I'm on the iPhone version of the application, I'm going to see a calling button. So I'm going to find Coco Shims, which is a dog apparently, and I'm going to call him because he's got a phone. But if I was on the non-application version, he wouldn't be able to hear me at all. So then we add things like the home button because we need to account for the fact they need to go back to the regular screen. So it's all HTML and it's getting delivered from the web, but it's hopefully trying to build kind of an application feel that you had before. But if I'm not on the web, then I can look at the icons to tell me to get to the app. So I have something that IDs to me that they aren't on the application and we need to get them there. So those are things that we had to consider as part of our case study. We just went through a great presentation on responsive design, but one of the things that we do kind of from the beginning with all these applications, whether it's an on-device app or if it's a web app or whatever it is catch all of the random situations that we're going to have with responsive web design. So the BlackBerries, I know probably nobody's talked about them this whole event. The newer ones actually are working with WebKit too. So they end up catching it and they actually have pretty decent designs. The iPhone and Android help with that. We actually have more problems with responsive design from Android, which nobody's probably talked about this event, because even though they use WebKit, they have weird padding rules. So when we do something like this, and we put those buttons side by side, sometimes they fall off the edge. because the padding on the Android has like a 2-pixel rule instead of a 1-pixel rule, and it's just, my designer can tell you more of the detail, but those are the things that we play with all the time. So another thing that we walk through is push notifications. Has anybody ever implemented push notifications into an application? All right, so you guys know that it's easy, but it's not as easy as you'd expect it to be. So we were fortunate because when we started the company, we built a text message solution, which I never recommend any of you do. And as I said at lunch, it wasn't the scumbag text solution where it's like sending you like free hot dogs at Coney Island, but we implemented this marketing solution that you could send messages out of. So we kind of hijacked that and started adding push notifications to it. So on that, we had to basically send the messages on different pipes because the Android handles them differently than the iPhone does. You have different certifications for each, or certs that you need for each one. So we had to consider all of those factors. And you can use services like Xtify, and the message aggregators are also coming out with stuff now. But I got quoted $1,500 for 10,000 messages for a month when I can send them for like 25 bucks off of a server you ramp up randomly on Amazon with no effort. So I don't know where they get the heart to steal your money like that. But then the other thing we had to think about with the push notifications is the notification bar and the badges. So we got all these things in place. We were sending push notifications, and then the badges just kept adding up and adding up and adding up, and we were like, okay, we got to clear them. So we had to build additional JavaScript APIs through PhoneGap that would clear those badges out and look to see whether you had a friend request or whether you had a message notification. So testing. This was a real beast for us, and it's one of the questions I see pop across many of the developer lists in this area, like how do you handle testing for these devices, because there's so many of them, right? So this is by far my favorite picture I've ever seen. The first thing we look at is build validation. We ran into, and a lot of my stories from here on out are going to be just my war stories, right? So we ran into situations where we thought we were like the coolest guys. We built an application, we'd submitted it to the iTunes store, and we were like, yes, we're out. But then we found out that we actually didn't build it right. We had all these problems with validation on it because this was in like Xcode 3.2 or something, and it wasn't signed for production use. This theme carried across all devices. I got rejected in the BlackBerry market because I didn't have the right signing, even though it signed and I could download it on an app and it worked. Like, so you really got to make sure when you're testing that you understand that there are different uses of it. So, and when you go through the how do I develop an app training, you go through, you'll figure out how those work. So when it comes to lab testing, we use a lot of tools like BlackBerry. I'm not a fan, but I'm going to tell you that they have the best simulators because you can go on and find any single device you need for a BlackBerry, download it, and then try out all the stuff. So they're actually great with that. Obviously, you can get the iPhone simulators through the SDK. You can get the Android simulators through the SDK. So getting those will save you a lot of money. But you also have to have a few devices hanging around the office. We have iPads, Android tablets, iPhones, iPod touches. We have 3 different types of BlackBerries, for torches to bolds to God knows what. But you need to be able to account for the small, the medium, and large devices. So when we were young, we're still a young company, but when we were humble and trying to figure out what we were doing, I used to go to the AT&T store every 2 days, and I used to stand there and play with all their devices to figure out what it was. Because when we look at the Android from the small, medium, and large devices for testing, our interfaces are all over the place. And before we actually learned that responsive web design was even an option, it was a pain in the ass. Like, we had to figure out how we were going to change the CSS, and our CSS sheets were like 30 pages long because we were saying, okay, the BlackBerry at this size is going to do this. So just try to get your hands on as much as you can. And then the third thing that we do is there's a website called usertesting.com. I used to do user testing for medical devices, and it costs thousands and thousands of dollars for like a 10-minute session with people. But usertesting.com is like 40 to 50 bucks, and we send like tests to them all the time. So once we get past round 1, we've actually built it, it works on the device, it's not crashing. We get to 2, we've actually seen that it looks good on all these. We go to 3 and we send it out to all these user testing sites, and we have people click the buttons and find out what issues they have. In this user testing is where we find out a lot of information around network issues. We find out information about where they might have another app installed that might conflict to it. So So it's a really important tool if you can get a hold of it. So.
They user testing today announced that they have new support for mobile testing.
Yeah.
With the camera, they got like a camera attached to people's computers.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
So they just announced it today? Yeah. I think we might have been part of a beta program with them. Like, cause literally that's what, like they have these guys and like they stick their devices underneath there and it's really cool. I mean, they do a great job. It's always funny for us cause we watch the video and they don't give you the names or anything, but then they upload their profile photos and it'll be like a witch or like some crazy thing. And we'll see it show up in our database. Like we can see that there's a new witch image all of a sudden and we're like, whoa. And then it shows up in the user test and we're like, oh, so. Does anybody know what this is from? Nobody? Nobody's an Archer fan? Nobody remembers when the pirate virus came through and destroyed the mainframe? That's 2 audiences. I thought one person would know it. Nobody does. So. All right, so gotchas. And feel free to stop me, ask me any questions, because these are just me throwing bullet points at you. So the first thing for us was push notifications. We didn't realize how much work it was going to be to put this common interface in place, and we also didn't realize how much managing the certs was actually important. In the iPhone, for example, there is a point in time where you can add the cert, so it ends up showing up in your entitlements list. And if you add it too early, then it doesn't end up showing up in the app. So you have to have it at a certain point in the build process.
Did you look at using anything like open airship for your push notification needs, or you just decided because you have the infrastructure in place that you're just going to do it yourself?
Yeah, when we were doing this, I don't think Urban Airship, how old is Urban Airship? Because I don't remember them being around when we first, a couple of years. We might have missed them. We weren't at Philly ETE to know last year. So we did it because we were already kind of had this stuff ourselves, and it was just a manner of how we were going to manage the certs and go through it. So the release process, as I said earlier, we went through many times when we thought we were building for production, but really we were in the development cycle. So just be cognizant of them being 2 different things. Images everywhere. Like our designer has basically job security forever because every time we add a new app, he's got to create an Android profile or an Android icon that's one side versus another side. Then he's got a promotional graphic. Then BlackBerry's got 3 different promotional graphics, and the iPhone has promotional graphics. And we have to do things in multiple languages because we are in the Caribbean too. So just to account for the fact that when you think your app is done and ready to go, you probably have another day's worth of images that you're going to have to create and screenshots and everything else. So, and it used to be that Android wasn't easy to get screenshots out of. Now it's a little easier with Ice Cream Sandwich and some of the stuff they have. So integrating other platforms. We have logins through Facebook. We have logins through Twitter and all the other crazy jazz that people use. We ended up spending probably about 4 weeks trying to figure out an issue with Facebook because the way we were sending the URL for them to log in from the app, the user agent wasn't the same as Facebook was looking for. So by changing the URL and saying go to the mobile version instead of the touch version, we solved all of our problems. But for 3 to 4 weeks, we were trying to capture things in the JavaScript or in the XML that was coming back to verify and redirect users. And it was a horrible experience. But you just got to consider those things. Like, if you're doing something special with PhoneGap, it might not portray itself as what you would see standard inside of a regular web page. So drawing a line for OS support. I was at a client site 2 weeks ago, and they presented me with the number of different versions of the Android and the percentages that are supported from each. And they were trying to tell me that 2.0 still had, and below had some support for it. You got to draw a line. There's things in WebKit that you can't support in these older devices. For us, for the voice over IP, we can't support anything below iOS 3 because they didn't support backgrounding for voice over IP before that. Or I don't even think they had APIs for some of the stuff around the microphones. No, they would have had those. But Android, same thing. Like 2.3 is when they got native support for voice over IP. BlackBerry, we tried to do it on OS 5. There was a 14-second delay. It was the funnest thing you could do. You'd call somebody, and you'd see them talking, and they could hear you because they had a faster device than you did. But then all of a sudden, you'd hang the call up, and all their audio would just come streaming at you, even though the call was ended. So you could run over there and run over here and listen to it. Preparing for a deprecation, we had a client we were trying to release, and they came to us and they said, we have this event in 2 to 3 weeks. It's going to be huge for you guys. It's going to be huge for us. We said, okay, cool. Well, we've got the app already built. We're going to We're going to release it and cross our fingers that we can get it through the App Store in 3 to 4 weeks. The OS version changed to 5. They deprecated a bunch of stuff. Apple started changing the rules within a week, and it was just like things that were like done buttons. All of a sudden, like you couldn't close a UI. So just make sure you prepare when they send out that note that says 5.1 coming soon or 6.0 coming soon. Get ahead of yourself, because when they deprecate things, you don't have a real choice. And you also have to account for in these that, we had code then that needed to be supporting iOS 4 and code that needed to be supporting iOS 5. So you have to account for that and figure it out. Android's a big challenge for us on the tablet side, because you're trying to figure out how to take the old Honeycomb tablets, the 2.3 devices, and the 4.0 devices. And the 4.0 devices have APIs around whether it's a big or large screen. And the other ones did too, but they were kind of finicky. So memory. One of the best lessons I ever learned from Heidi at Chariot, which is no longer with us. No longer with Chariot, I should say. She's still a great person. Was about the fact that a lot of people go into PhoneGap and they think, hey, I can create an application now and it's going to be awesome because I can use HTML and JavaScript to create this application, and they dismiss the memory management side of things and making sure that your app closes correctly and all the other stuff that goes into it. You got to look for crashes. You got to look for leaks. We've been working on this BlackBerry issue for like 3 months now, and this week we found out that it was all related to threads with UIs that were coming up. So even though we were loading things in a web view or a browser field for BlackBerry, we're still having memory leaks, and we were still running into this issue where we couldn't actually get the device to respond. And after 8 clicks, the memory would get full and then it'd crash because it was too low. Or after 8 clicks, there'd be too many threads and it'd crash or get stuck in a loop. So make sure you remember that it's not a website, it's an application, and that's a big, big difference. So networking, you got to account for the inevitable. I went to a hotel launch 3 weeks ago, was expecting to be there for 4 days. The hotel had not finished the road, let alone the Wi-Fi network, and we started doing testing. We found out things about our app that we never knew happened, and we really needed to adjust it so that if the network went down, we could make sure that all the services in the app started back up and everything that was dependent. So when you cache inside the app, that's really important, and you obviously fix some things. For us, we can't just cache everything in the app because the voice over IP requires a connection, and the content is obviously stored in the cloud as well. So. And then the last thing I think I got on this list is keep an eye on all code changes. Another thing we ran into when we use tools like PhoneGap or Titanium or any of these, right, is they're open source projects, which are awesome because you get great people making great moves. But you want to make sure you review the changes, because once you start integrating your own plugins and doing these things, you could get stuck in a loop where something you did worked, but then all of a sudden they changed it because it made more sense for the project, and then your stuff doesn't work anymore. And this is what happened to us with another time with the BlackBerry. Don't do BlackBerry development. But with the BlackBerry, we ended up in the situation where every time the page loaded, it would stop all the services we were running in the background, because in PhoneGap, they changed the onDestroy method. So it used to live for the life, and then all of a sudden in the later versions of it, which we thought we were upgrading to be proactive, it actually broke our stuff. But it was, once we saw the change, it was an easy fix, and it was actually beneficial to us. So there's more. Any questions first? This slide got replaced. It used to be these like underwear gnomes trying to take a lady out from under her bed, but they deemed it inappropriate for any presentations going forward. My staff did this. So now they said, why don't you replace it with a monkey? And I was like, all right. So one thing people ask us is what to expect from the store. How many people have put an app in the App Store? 2. How many people are considering making an application? All right, cool. So Android obviously has a giant advantage. You put it in the App Store, it's live. I would do Android app development all day just for that reason. The disadvantage is that they don't really have a great environment for you to manage the apps. So like in the Android store, you can't have like multiple administrators who can update the app, so your graphics person can't change things if they need to. So that's the only real downside I've found so far. And they're changing all that now that things have been going into the Play Market or store, or whatever they're calling it. iPhone, our experience has been 3 to 4 weeks for first submission, but I get corrected on this by every single person who's been lucky enough to have it in like a week. So as I start to see more weeks, instead of 3 to 4 weeks, I can bring this down. I might be able to say 2 to 3 weeks now because I have seen better luck. So follow-up submissions typically are a few days to a week. They're usually not too bad. Be very clear when you're writing out the instructions for them. Like whenever we send an app in to be tested, we put a URL, we put a username, we put a password. The worst thing ever is when we send 2 apps at the same time and we have the username and password and they try to use one from the other because you got the same guy doing it and he fails one because he used the wrong password. And the Apple Store, you'll get a note back that says your app doesn't work because it says my password's wrong. So they don't like try to troubleshoot it. They just stop on the mark, restart the process, and you got to go through it again. So just be very descriptive of what you're trying to tell them. And then make sure you test and validate before submitting because you don't want to get rejected over and over again. The new versions of Xcode do a great job of just making sure that you're good to go. So we didn't have that luxury to begin with. BlackBerry, signing up for an account is a lot more tedious. They have both iPhone and BlackBerry, you have to send in all these corporate documents and all these other things. But then once you're set up, you should be able to get approved pretty quickly. We've seen initial responses at about a week. So the development environment. So one of the things that we kind of get asked as well is how do we set up the development environment? Because when we do a lot of C#, we do a lot of Rails development. Everybody has all the stuff on their device or their computers. They use Git to pull it in, pull it out, whatever they got to do. With these devices, though, with these applications, it's a lot different. With the iPhone, you're trying to install these certs. You can pretty easily get the iPhone set up in multiple environments, but make sure that the certs and all the code's compiled in each one before you send somebody else to go use it. With the BlackBerry, you have to have these signing certs. So you basically have to get, every time that you launch a version for the device, it goes through 130 times and signs everything. And each time they sign something, they send you an email. So make sure you set up something to forward those. But what we do is we basically have individual environments, but then we've also set up pair stations where we can actually remotely log into. So if we're working with contractors, for example, or if our team needs to get in to build a BlackBerry app or an Android app, we've set up these pair stations so that they're already configured and they don't have to worry about all the rigmarole that goes through changing the application for the client and all the stuff around that. Git is kind of our best friend in how we do this. We initially developed it and we wanted to put everything into individual folders and have client-based folders and then tell the iPhone to build the Now folder versus the Secrets folder or the Marriott folder or whatever. What we found is that it was better for us to build one master branch, and we've used Git to our favor to say, okay, here's our master, here's our feature branches, and then here's our client branches. So when we do development with Git, we pull out and create a feature branch. Once it's approved, we pull that into the master branch. And the master branch just basically does nothing but provide us a test interface. We call it Movitas Phone. It's the coolest app on my iPhone. We use that to touch the buttons. We have buttons that basically, because PhoneGap is all JavaScript based, right? So we have show the dial pad, show me the GPS locations, send me a push notification, clear the badges. All those things come into it. Once we pass through that testing, then we use that Git branch. We merge everything into the client branches individually. Then we can build those and we can send those out to whatever store is appropriate. It's worked well for us. Nobody's said it's a bad idea, but if anybody has better ideas, we're always willing to hear them. Then the last thing we had is a lot of times you bang your head against walls to find the tools to debug. So I really emphasize that before you even start building, that you figure out all the things you need to figure out what's wrong. So for the iPhone, for example, you might want to get some of the tools that are there to help you manage the memory and see if there's any leaks. Figure out how you can debug just by using a common app. Basically download whatever sample application that provider, whether it's BlackBerry, Android, or iPhone, says to build, and just get familiar with the logs, get familiar with how you access them. The BlackBerry, again, was a giant issue for us because we didn't have a clue how to debug the crash scenarios. And when you go on the forums, they're like, oh yeah, you got to find the web inspector. Well, the web inspector is like WebKit, but you can't access it unless you're on the WebWorks thing. And we found that if you just plug in the desktop manager and you put in a code, you get all the logs in 10 seconds. But it took us 2 weeks to figure that out because the support wasn't there. So So make sure you know all those things and kind of make it work. So what's next? For us, we have to prepare to iterate. So obviously we keep building our process to make sure we're ready for OS updates. One of the best things about these apps is that people can send you feedback. So make sure that you get feedback on it. They'll send you that information. So we can adjust and fix errors based on that. Or the hotels always give us feedback too, which is never fun, but always fun. We do surveys, we do focus groups, and then we watch our analytics to see what the highest and lowest usages is. So we can separate our analytics for apps versus our analytics for mobile website usage and see who's going where on the different things. So we know that the social elements will get used a little more on the app because people are looking for the calling stuff than they would be on the mobile website. So the next thing we do is really work on tablet support and similar framework that we're doing there. And then our big thing, and I kind of hinted at the beginning, is this offline support. So when we talked about caching earlier, our biggest issue right now is caching. Our biggest issue is that when you go offline and you step off that resort and you go into that town to go to Mandala, the most amazing dance club you've ever been to in life, with Kevin on stage, that you lose that ability. So we're giving them deals, but they move off property, they don't have those deals. So Facebook, a lot of this method that we've used is the same method that Facebook uses, except for they didn't use PhoneGap, right? And they do this HTML5 across all the different devices that they support, and then they have this interface before it that caches and understands what's coming in and going. So, as they were saying earlier, having those loading screens makes it feel like something's going on while you're syncing all the stuff, or something that says the network's not available. When you do this offline support, that's really the things we're looking for. So for us, we've spent a lot of time, probably the most time in the last 2 months, tweaking these apps. So when you step out of a connection zone, it properly informs you that, hey, this isn't going to work right now, but in a nice way. Or when loading is slow, you can imagine that many of the hotels you've been to, they don't have necessarily the best Wi-Fi. So if the loading is slow, we can't have them just clicking as fast as possible. So we kind of gray the screen out, or we introduce a loading indicator that says, hey, it's going to come soon. And it kind of soothes you a little bit. After 5-10 seconds, you get pissed about it, but at least you know that something's happening. So, but the more we can build offline support, the less we'll have to worry about that. And then we're constantly looking for application support and building a team for that. So if anybody ever wants a job, call me. So that was my quick case study. What questions do you guys have? Any? Yeah.
You mentioned analytics briefly. I'm curious if what analytics look like in PhoneGap or these other data graphics. Same thing or different?
Well, PhoneGap's just a web UI. So we use Piwik for our internal analytics, and then our clients use Google Analytics or whatever they want. So the analytics we collect are still through those tools. We just identify the user agents in different ways so that we know it's coming from a BlackBerry or an iPhone that's an application versus a BlackBerry and iPhone that's just through Safari or whatever it may be. So.
And do you think that'll have to change a lot for offline?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that because we still have to figure out how we're going to cache that style of information. So we collect additionally transaction-oriented data too. So when somebody redeems an offer, or when somebody checks in, when somebody does a review, all of those things are additional stuff that we have to save locally and then push to the cloud afterwards. So those will help us get analytics around which pages they're on and what information they're going to. So.
I have absolutely no familiarity with PhoneGap, so this question may not make sense. But so earlier in the slides, you're talking about all the different graphics and things to get it to look like a BlackBerry app, to make it look like an Android app, to make it look like an iPhone app, and getting all that correct. Are there libraries or Bootstrap, CSS things that give you all that for the different devices that you can draw?
Yeah, I mean, like jQuery for mobile or Sencha, you can package those up with the PhoneGap app and basically make whatever you want. A lot of people even flex.
Really specific things, though, like you were trying to skin it like a BlackBerry.
Oh, the native stuff?
Yeah.
I don't think there's necessarily libraries for those. I mean, it depends on what you're trying to do. There might be tools there. Like if you're doing an RSS style app, I'm sure you can find a library that has interfaces for RSS apps that have the dots at the bottom. There's a company called Point About that actually had some stuff that we've seen pop up in the past. So You can typically find a lot of libraries. And Facebook, what's the 2030s? They've got a whole application like library that they've got out that they released for some of the, like the pull down screens and the stuff like that.
I mean, I've seen the generic stuff and I've used some stuff in jQuery and evolved. It seemed like you had to spend a lot of time, or your designers to spend a lot of time to make it look like it, you know, make it look right on each device, or make it look like it's natural for that device. There was stuff out there for that.
Yeah, sometimes not. So.
Your overview mentions app updates. I don't know if I missed it, or did you not talk about that?
App updates, like when we release a new update to the thing.
Yeah.
That was what I was trying to emphasize with like when we pull out from Git from the master and then we have to go through and submit all those apps over again. Some of our app updates, because it's in a content management system, are automatically delivered. So for example, one of the most recent features we've added is internationalization. So if you have a Spanish browser on your phone or whatever, if your phone's set to Spanish or Russian or whatever it is, our content management system can actually adjust the content. That's not something we had to release a new app for, which was a big advantage for us because that would have been a complete nightmare trying to tell them how to test Spanish versus English and all the other stuff. But things like adding in network connectivity stuff, things that are actually native to the device, we have to release a full app update to that. And then internally, we have to package each one for each client and then submit that individually and run through the process. So.
We had an app that's mostly all HTML, basically just camera access and everything that was native. We weren't sure yet, it's not been released, but just didn't know like, how much we could change on the HTML side before Apple would say, hey, that's really a new app, you need to resubmit this.
Is the HTML on the device or is it hosted someplace?
Right now it's on it, but we're planning to find a way to cache it, pull it down, pull it on, work offline, but be able to update it whenever we need it to without resubmitting an app. Just didn't know how much.
That's a tricky place, right? So you actually have to sync it and find a way to sync the changes. For us, we worked on an XPN app years ago, right? And Apple put the stamp on it, rejected, because they have a concept of what they call web clipping, and they don't like that with PhoneGap, right? So PhoneGap currently is built in a way that if you put the HTML on the device, that's acceptable because they feel that HTML and JavaScript to build applications natively is okay. But if you build a PhoneGap app that doesn't do anything native and just is trying to communicate with an externally hosted site, then they feel it's a web clipping and they feel like it's cluttering the App Store and has no real value. And that's they get pissed about that. They've actually came back to us once and said, can you consolidate your applications? And we said, well, we can't have the same, like different brands, in the same application for what we're trying to do because they're different users, different contents and all this stuff. But they're very big, as they were saying earlier today, they're very big on making sure the App Store is clean and not like cluttered with stuff that could be device level, like an HTML5 app. But if you can sync the content, like whether it's through JSON or something like that, so when you load it, it goes to the web and it pulls the content down and it stores it locally, then you've got a different scenario. So.
Out of curiosity, can you share the type of CMS that it is that you're using?
We built it. Yeah, Movitas started. Movitas started as FindMe a while ago, and Movitas and FindMe merged. But FindMe was our primary focus was on mobile CMS. So before iPhones even were out, we were trying to figure out how to make flip phones look like cool phones. That's why I've got a beard and I'm kind of rugged. So we built that with the user and the text message stuff. So if you're ever looking for it, I mean, we do license it out to agencies, but we've kind of stopped just because the content system is great for destination-based stuff, but there are a lot of new tools out like CSS3 that we feel does a great job too. But I should have put, if you go to movitas.com, you can find our information if you have any questions. So cool.
When you were talking about push notifications and text messages, I was a little confused, but just if you do you use text messaging as a fallback for clients that can't do push notifications, or?
We have a marketing system that supports email, push notifications, and text messaging. So like our clients that are in the US will use the text messaging side. It allows you to label somebody. So like if you go to an event like this, you might say the mobile track would get a text message for something versus, you know, the enterprise or whatever. So, so it's not a fallback. It's all dependent on the user and how they want to send it out. So push notifications is a lot better. Text messages are extremely overregulated, and they just got worse. But they're a great asset in order to get information out. So what other questions you guys got? None. Cool. Well, thanks, guys. I hope this was at least helpful.